Okay, morning everyone. Thanks for joining us on our live webinar in relation to the extended job retention scheme. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Claire Scanlon. I'm the Managing Director and one of the solicitors at Guardian Law. I'm doing this webinar this morning in collaboration with Joy. So I'm going to hand you over to Joy now to introduce herself and to run through the provisions of the new scheme.
Good morning everyone. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Joy Parks. I'm employed by Guardian Business Services as an HR consultant, and my role is to support employers with the life cycle of the employee. Just 1 minute. I'm very novice at this, so you'll just have to bear with me. So following the announcement by Boris Johnson on the 31st of October, he announced that England was going into the 4-week nationwide lockdown. And obviously that's going to affect businesses. So to support businesses, the coronavirus job retention scheme is now being extended rather than closed as originally planned. So I'm going to take you through the slides, and then Claire will be available at the end to answer any questions for you. If you've got any questions in the meantime, there is a chat function if you want to ask questions along the way, and we'll try and answer as we go along. So. No, hang on a minute. There we go. So on the agenda today, we're going to look at the basics, the terms, the claim, the payments, the calculations, the agreement, absence, employee rights, retention of documents, re-engagement, the job retention bonus, we'll then go through some key dates, and we've got some frequently asked questions that we've prepared, but obviously, like I say, if you've got any additional ones, then we can go through those with you. So the basics. So the extended scheme will run from 1st of November this year till the 31st of March next year, but there will be a review in January. And all private UK employers can claim, irrespective of whether the employer or the employee have previously used the scheme before. In December, one slight difference is in December, HMRC will start publishing details of employers using the scheme. This is Some say it's to catch people out in case people are put on the scheme and they don't know about it, and I think it could just be to name and shame, but they are going to be publishing details this time, so that is different from last time. And to avoid having two schemes running simultaneously, the job support scheme has now been postponed. So, to be eligible, employers must have been on the employer's payroll before midnight on the 30th of October 2020. This means that a real-time information submission notifying payment for that employee to the HMRC must have been made on or before the 30th of October 2020. Employees can be on any type of contract. For example, you can have full-time, part-time, fixed-term, 0 hours, agency, apprentices, so it covers all types of contracts. And you can fully furlough your employees, which means that they don't do any work for you during the period they're furloughed, or you can put them on a flexible furlough arrangement in which you can ask them to work reduced hours, and you pay them for the hours they work, and they furlough for the hours that they don't. So that's the same as before. And again, same as before, they can't undertake any work for you during that time that you record them as being on furlough. So no checking emails or answering emails during that time, because that would break the terms of the agreement. However, they can undertake training, so you can get them engaged with training, and it's possibly nice to do that because it does keep them engaged with the company and connected with you. So if you've got any training that needs to be covered, get that done before your busy period start next year, hopefully. The one thing you do need to note though, during any period of training, they must receive at least minimum wage. So the people that you've got on low wages, check your calculations to ensure that the 80% furlough grant covers this. If not, then you will need to top it up to minimum wage. So employers will be able to agree any working arrangements with the employees, but there is a pattern, a claim period of 7 days. And you can employ all your staff or just some of your staff, it doesn't matter. But be careful how you select which employees you're going to place on furlough. Make sure there's no discriminative factors. So don't furlough all your part-timers, for example, and consider rotating it. And please remember, when making decisions regarding any aspect of the furlough scheme, equality and discrimination laws apply. So it's what I've just said. So what can we claim for? So employers can claim the furlough grant for the hours their employees are not working, and this is calculated by reference to their usual hours worked in a claim period. The calculations for working out the usual hours and the reference salary are the same as under the old scheme, and for those employers eligible under the old scheme, as for those that eligible under the old scheme, even if a claim wasn't made for them. So this is paid at 80% of their reference salary and is subject to a full-time equivalent cap of 2,500 per month, that is. There are new reference periods for employees not eligible under the old scheme, and you'll need to report hours worked and the usual hours an employee would be expected to work in any claim period. When claiming the grant for the furloughed hours, employers will need to report and claim for a minimum period of 7 consecutive calendar days, and the claim period must start and end in the same calendar month. Now, if you've got a pay period that includes dates for more than 1 month, separate claims will need to be submitted covering the days that fall in each month. The claims will be calculated separately, and the claim periods can't overlap. The good news is that employers can claim in anticipation of a pay run, and this will be done at any point, at the point that you run your payroll, or any point after. So the claim lines opened yesterday, 8 o'clock yesterday morning. There was open and a claim, but to make a claim under the furlough agreement, you must have an agreement with your employee. It is only relevant from the date of that agreement, with the exception of the have allowed retrospective agreements made from the 1st of November until now, but you've got to put that claim in by tomorrow. So like I say, you've only got till the 13th of November. For your monthly submissions, claims relating to each month must be submitted by the 14th of the following month. So you've got a 2-week window there, and grant payments are expected 6 working days after the first claim. The closing date for the claims for the old scheme that was up until the 31st of October, they remain at the 30th of November, so there's no difference there. So the payment, so the 2,500, the cap of it, and the 80% is for the months of November, December and January. As I said, there will be the government will contribute 80%. There will be a cap of 2,500. That is full-time equivalent. And obviously the employee would forego the remaining 20% of their wages for the hours that they don't work. If you flexi-furlough anybody, then you should pay them in full for the hours that they do work, and obviously that's subject to the normal statutory deductions of tax and national insurance. And you will also, as an employee, will also be responsible for paying national insurance and pension contributions on the full amount the employee receives. So that includes any scheme grant. So the furlough amount is still subject to your NIC and pension contributions. The government will be reviewing the scheme in January, and when dependent on how things are in the economic situation, it may be asking employers to contribute more towards hours not worked, so payments could differ from the 1st of February, as they did this year for September and October. We don't know what the percentages will be there. So the calculations, so employers have previously been furloughed continue to have their reference paying hours based on the existing furlough calculations. So it's as they were under the old scheme. If you've got anybody that hasn't previously been furloughed, but they were eligible under the old scheme, you will still use this same method. For those that are not eligible, there's new rules. And broadly speaking, employees on fixed wages, the pay is based on 80% of the wages payable in the last pay period ending on or before the 30th of October. And for those on variable wages, 80% of the average pay payable between the latter of the start date of their employment or the 6th of April and the day before their furlough the new extension period begins. The calculations are complex and will depend on each employee, so make sure that you follow the relevant guidelines to work out usual hours and reference pay. There's lots of details on the government website. If any, you've got anything that's a little bit confusing, there are quite a lot of examples on there. I mentioned earlier that you will need to have an agreement with your employee. So it is considered to be a temporary variation to contract, and it needs to be by written agreement with the employee. So to be eligible then for the grant, the employer must have confirmed in writing to the employee that they've been placed on furlough or flexible furlough. The terms of the agreement must reflect the hours that the employee actually works or not works under the period of the agreement, and employees must agree and be given details of what it entails. But it's not a requirement of the scheme for them to respond in writing. However, we would recommend this as it being a temporary variation. And you've got that piece of paper then, should people ask, should it be needed in the future. An email reply is sufficient for that. They don't need to sign the agreement. When you're claiming for the grant, you can only make it from the date of the agreement unless it's a retrospective agreement, which I've covered earlier. So anything that was put in place from the 1st and up to and including the 13th of November. For those of you that were proactive and you've already put in place the job support scheme open agreements, then in anticipation of the launch, which was the 1st of November, then contact your employees because they will need to go on the new furlough agreement. And just to explain, it was a last minute decision from the government, and that's why you're changing it. And although the 7-day claim period applies, there is no minimum furlough period, and flexible furlough agreements can be for any amount of time and entered into more than once. So what happens if your employee is off work? So they can be furloughed when they're unable to work, either because they're shielding or they need to stay at home with someone who is shielding. Obviously that's in line with public guidance, or they have caring responsibilities resulting from coronavirus. That includes employees that need to look after children as a result of the coronavirus. Or if they've got an illness that is likely to become long-term, you can actually put them on furlough for that. It's not designed to cover short-term absence, but if an employee is off sick or becomes sick, employers can furlough them, providing there is a business reason for doing them. And the employee at that time, they must be paid a minimum of statutory sick pay. So if the furlough grant doesn't cover that, then again, you would have to make that up. Annual leave, that's going to continue to accrue while the employee is on furlough, but they can take holiday while they're on furlough. So if an employee is flexibly furloughed, then any hours taken as holiday during the claim period should be counted as furloughed hours rather than working hours. But you must make that up to 100% of the wages, because obviously that's their statutory right, that when they're on annual leave, they get 100% of the wages. So it will be 80% claim, you'd claim back through the furlough grant, and you top it the other 20% up. The scheme isn't really designed to be placing people on furlough for periods simply because they're on holiday. It's a topic for discussion, but it's not really designed just because they're on holiday. Bank holidays can be included there, and furlough rules will apply. So if an employee usually works bank holidays, then the employer can agree that this is included in the grant payment. And if the employer usually takes the bank holiday as leave, then the employer would either have to top up their usual holiday pay or give the employee a day of holiday in lieu. If the employee works part-time and would not normally work on that day, then they wouldn't be eligible for the grant. So for example, this year, Christmas Day falls on a Friday. So if you've got a part-time employee that wouldn't normally work on Fridays, you can't claim the furlough payment for that day, as it's not one of their normal working days. Anybody else that would normally work on the Friday, you can claim the furlough payment if they're on the furlough scheme. While employees are on furlough, then they will continue to have employee rights in line with the current employment contract, company policies and statutory guidelines, and they include SSP, annual leave, maternity, paternity and adoption rights, unfair dismissal, and, as I've said before, payment of national minimum wage for any hours that they do work. Now, many furloughed employers were made redundant at the end of October on the assumption that the furlough scheme was ending and the company could no longer afford to keep them employed. Those employees can now be rehired in order to join the new furlough scheme, providing that the return was made to the HMRC, so that's the real-time information return, and that was for the period from the 23rd of September 2020, obviously till the 30th of October. I must say there that you're not under any obligation to rehire, but it's something that you may want to consider, but like I say, you don't have to agree it. You would be expected to re-engage on the same terms and conditions unless you'd had a conversation with the employee and you was changing the terms and conditions by agreement with them. There's many things to consider though before rehiring an employee that's been made redundant. Therefore, I would advise that you get legal advice before you do it. And in some cases, it would mean that the employees will have to repay all the redundancy payments, and that would include accrued leave, the redundancy, statutory redundancy pay, any enhanced redundancy pay, and the pay in lieu of notice. It could be that the employee is not able to pay that back. Say it's landed in their account, they've got an overdraft, so they're now not able to pay it. You can actually agree for it to be repaid in instalments. It will then be termed as a loan to the company was making a loan to the individual, and you would then make the instalments and take it out of their future furlough payments. To do this, you must obtain a written agreement covering deduction from wages and any clawback, because you want to cover yourself should the employee leave or is dismissed prior to repayment in full. At the end of, if we get to the end of the furlough agreement and work hasn't picked up, and you then need to be making redundancies, you would have to go through the same, go through a full redundancy process, and redundancy criteria will apply. And at this point, the government has confirmed that it will be reviewing whether or not claims can be made for employees serving contractual or statutory notice periods from the 1st of December. But it's not clear if that means that those served notice before this date, you'll be able to claim during the period of the notice period. We are expecting further guidance on this at the end of the month, but it's something to consider, because you would then be, if you serve them notice and during that notice period, you would be responsible for 100% of their wages. Now to the bit about retention of documents. As everything, any agreements with employees must be retained for 5 years, and you must also keep a record of how many hours each employee works and the number of hours they have been furloughed for, and they must be retained for 6 years. The job retention bonus, that's now been put on hold, and the retention incentive will be reviewed. So the retention bonus was the £1,000 one-off taxable payment if you was keeping furloughed employees, if you continue to employ them after the 31st of January. But as I say, that's now gone on hold, and the new furlough scheme, until the new furlough scheme is taken over, we don't know what that's going to look like in the future. So finally from me, so I've got some key dates. So dates to remember: 23rd of September, that's the date on or after which an employee must have been employed in order to be eligible for re-employment. and furlough after being made redundant. So anybody who's got redundant, re-engaging them, that is a key date for you. The 30th of October is the date on or before which an employee must have been included on the employer's payroll and included in the RTI submission. And the 31st of October was when the old scheme ended, and 1st of November when the new one commenced. The 11th of November, so yesterday, that's when you can start applying for your grants, and tomorrow is the deadline for any retrospective agreements to be in place. If you've got any claims under the old scheme, 30th of November is the last date that you can make those claims, and in January there will be a review of employer contributions to the scheme. The scheme ends on the 31st of March, and for the 14th of each month you can make the claim for the previous month. So the 14th of December will be when you claim for November. Claire, that's me.
Thank you, Joy.
So
thank you very much, Joy. That was very helpful. I'm now going to run through a series of frequently asked questions. These are just sort of broadly the ones that we get asked on quite a regular basis. I will sort of open it up at the end for you to ask any questions that you might have that we don't cover in this section. So I'll start with the first one. Can employees take annual leave without interrupting their furlough? Yes is the answer to that one. So it remains the same as it was under the old scheme. So employees can be on furlough and take their annual leave at the same time. But as Joy quite rightly pointed out, during any period of holiday, if your employee is on 80% of the wages under the scheme, that needs to be topped up to 100%. So some employers want their employees to take annual leave during the period of furlough because they don't want them to continue accruing it and then have a backlog for them all to take. If that's the case and you've not got, your employee isn't requesting annual leave, then there is a right for you to serve notice on your employees to take leave. The notice that you've got to serve has got to be double the amount for the holidays that they want to take. So for example, if you wanted them to take a week's holiday, you would need to give them 2 weeks notice. Doesn't need to be anything overcomplicated. It can be a short letter saying we require you to take annual leave between these dates. So that's obviously you can all have your own individual policies as to whether or not you're happy for employees to take leave during furlough, but it is possible, so nothing really has changed in that respect. So that then follows on to the next question. Can the furlough grant be claimed for the employee on annual leave? So yes, it can, but obviously, as we've said, that needs to be topped up to 100%, and you claim the 80% subject to the cap back from the government. Another question that we're often asked is, can I just put an employee on furlough just to cover their annual leave? I guess the short answer to that is it's not within the spirit of the scheme. So the scheme is designed to cover businesses that have been impacted by the pandemic. So for example, if there just isn't the work available for them, so it's effectively in place of having to make employees redundant. So the spirit of the scheme isn't really designed, for example, if you have somebody who's working and then wants to take some holiday, it really wouldn't be within the spirit of the scheme to just put them on furlough purely as a result of them taking annual leave so that you can claim that back. Next question, which I think Joy is covered, can the furlough grant be claimed for bank holidays? So yes, it can, as long as that employee would ordinarily have worked that, so that would be classed as normal holiday, for example, and it can be claimed, again, subject to the top-up provisions that I've already discussed. Next one, this is regarding the carrying forward of annual leave. So can an employee insist on carrying it forward? The answer to that is no. So as an employer, you should do everything reasonably practical to ensure that leave is taken during the current year, and the reason for that is in relation to the regulations concerning working time. So there's an onus on employers in relation to protection of their employees' health and safety to ensure that they get adequate rest time, etc. And that includes taking their annual leave. Obviously, if there's a genuine business reason or another reason why an employee can't take the leave during the current year, then they can carry forward up to 4 weeks into the next 2 years, and that's obviously been brought in through the legislation. But that legislation wasn't brought in simply to allow employees to insist on carrying it forward. So you can, if you wish, as I've said previously, serve notice on your employees to take their annual leave, to ensure that you don't end up with all your employees having a huge backlog of holidays when they return to work. A couple of other questions that I just want to cover that we get asked is in relation to re-engagement. So as Joy quite rightly pointed out, a number of employers went through redundancy processes over the last few months, which some of them may have been, the employment may have ended on or around the 30th of October, some of which might also still be working the notice period. There's a question around re-engagement. So if more than one employee is being made redundant, do I have to re-engage them all? Simple answer to that is no, you don't have to re-engage any of them. If you do re-engage some and not others, you just need to be careful that you've got objective reasons to justify why you've done that. That's going to be particularly difficult if, for example, you've got 5 people doing the same job and they've all been made redundant, and you choose one and not the others. You would need to be able to demonstrate why that was the case. Now, it might be as a result of the scoring process that you've gone through on a redundancy, for example. So, you've chosen the person with the next highest score, and that would be justification. And you also just need to make sure that whoever it is that you engage in, as opposed to who you don't, and that any reasons are not discriminatory. Can you re-engage on new terms and conditions? Yes, you can. But you need to make sure that any changes to terms and conditions are agreed. So as is always the case, when you want to change an employee's terms and conditions, that needs to be done with agreement. So you would need to explain to the employee what change you want to make and why you want to make it. And if you do, then I would always confirm that in writing and get your employee to confirm their acceptance. So one of them that's often changed can be notice periods. So some employers might have a longer notice period in their contract of employment, which perhaps is longer than the statutory notice periods, and they want to revert back to statutory notice periods. So that's one that you could look at, but as I say, you would need to ensure that that is agreed with them and it is confirmed in writing. If you re-engage an employee who's being made redundant, can you put them on flexible furlough and offer them work? Well, yes, you can. If your circumstances have changed and you now have a little bit of work for them to do, then that's fine. You can put them on a flexible furlough agreement. Next question, if I re-engage an employee, will I have to go through a full redundancy process in the future if business doesn't pick up? Yes, you will. So the situation you'll find yourself in is that if you get to the end of the furlough period and work hasn't picked up and you no longer have enough work to sustain all of your employees in that particular role, then you would need to go through a formal redundancy process, which will involve obviously consultation and selection. That employee will also be entitled to their notice, any redundancy payments, etc. Just picking up on one further point that Joy made, the government have confirmed in their recent guidance published on the 10th of November that they're intending on reviewing the position in relation to claiming furlough grants for employees that are either serving statutory or contractual notice. So up until under the old scheme, it was lawful for employers to serve notice on an employee and to claim part of their notice payments back under the scheme. So an employee could be serving the notice whilst on furlough, albeit that the pay had to be topped up to 100% for the notice pay. The government has said that they are going to review that, and it may change from the 1st of December. What's not clear on that point is that if you have served notice before the 1st of December and that extends beyond the 1st of December, whether you'll be able to claim it or whether it actually means from the 1st of December you will not be able to claim any part of an employee's notice period. Something that we need to, we're waiting on further guidance on, but obviously that's quite a big change really from the old scheme and may impact on businesses' decisions to re-employ people. Does an employee have to repay the redundancy payments if re-engaged? In some circumstances, yes. So if there's no break in the contract of employment, you could ask for the redundancy payments to be repaid. So as Joy already said, if due to circumstances the employee isn't able to agree to pay the money back straight away, then you can agree a repayment plan with them. Just make sure that everything's covered in a written agreement so that there can be no dispute. But I would stress that when you're looking, if you're considering re-engagement or re-employment, that you seek legal advice, because there are quite complex rules in relation to continuity of service and what rights that employee would have as well. So that's covered all the questions, or the typical questions that we normally have on furlough, but I'm going to sort of open it up now to people if they want to ask any questions on the furlough scheme or any changes that have come in. So if you can unmute yourself, you can. No questions?
Yeah, I've got a couple if that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine.
You know, regarding the payments that you can, when you claim them back, I know you said obviously one's due by tomorrow. You know, if you're on weekly pay, do you have to do them every 14 days, or will it still be like every month by the 14th?
I don't think you have to, I don't know if that was a bit of a misunderstanding. I don't think you have to make a claim by tomorrow. I think the reference to the 13th is in respect of, if, for example, you've had somebody who's not been working, who has effectively been furloughed since the 1st of November, but obviously because the announcement was made very late, what the guidance is saying is, as long as you've got a furlough agreement or something in writing confirming that employee has been furloughed by tomorrow, the 13th, you can backdate that furlough claim to the 1st.
Right.
Does that clarify that point for you?
Yeah, that one's fine then.
Yeah.
And then we're letting our staff carry over 5 holiday days that we want them to use by the 31st of March next year.
Okay.
Do I just put a little letter in place just to give them to the people that've got holidays left, just so that it's clear?
Yeah, or you can do like a memo to all your staff just to say that this is the policy that you're adopting, and that, you know, they're going to be required to take they'll be allowed to carry over the 5 days, but they'll be required to take them by 31st of March next year. And you could always say as well that in the event that they don't, they'll lose them, or that you may be forced to serve notice to take holidays.
Well, and then last one, sorry. I had a conversation with Kate on the 2nd of November, because obviously the 1st is a Sunday.
Yeah.
Does that matter that the letter's dated the 2nd, or?
No, because what the guidance is suggesting is that as long as you've got something in place by tomorrow and that employee has been legitimately on furlough since the 1st, then you can backdate the claim to that date.
Lovely. That's brilliant. Thank you.
No problem. Anybody else got any questions? No? No questions. That's unusual. We obviously explained it extremely well. I mean, generally, the position of furlough is broadly the same as it has been. There are obviously a few nuances in relation to sort of people who weren't eligible under the old scheme, for example, new starters. So there are different reference periods, as Joy quite rightly pointed out, but broadly speaking, it appears at the moment, unless we get further guidance, that the rules are broadly the same in relation to issues surrounding holiday, etc. And as we've also said, best practice is to document everything in writing, make sure you keep a copy of it. One other thing that I would also suggest in relation to people that are on flexible furlough is keep a written record of the hours that they work, because that might be required by HMRC for up to 6 years. So albeit that you might have a furlough agreement that says you're required to work, you know, 20 hours out of your 40, I would always suggest that you keep a written document confirming what hours they've worked each week, so that if required in the future, you've got it. So that's just a piece of sort of practical advice, really. Okay, anybody got any further questions? No? Okay, well, if we've got no further questions, then we'll end the seminar. Obviously, here at Guardian, we've got Guardian Law and Guardian Business Services. If anybody's got any further questions or needs help with any issues, whether that be in relation to furlough or anything else that's employment or HR related, then please don't hesitate to contact us. You know, we've got support at guardianlaw.co.uk, support@guardian.co.uk or support@guardian.online, and where you can contact us on our landline 0115 870 0150. But thank you everyone for attending. It was nice to see you all.